I will not be silent to appease black ignorance, especially when that black ignorance hinders true black liberation. Our plight has absolutely nothing to do with a biblical fairy tale written by our most ungodly's enemies. And our condition has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth that presents what would in fact be the least effective method used for controlling generations of billions of people. The time of believing in things that literally insults our own intelligence has now passed. We've entered the age of the awakening truth. Here's the truth of our plight and condition. There are presently white men that specialize in psychiatry and propaganda that works unrelentingly behind the scenes, manipulating the collective minds of black people. These men govern our minds, molds our opinions, and shapes our perceptions in ways that serves and protects the interests of the white society. In response to the 1960s unprecedented unified black protests, these men deployed an ideological subversion system against black people. Ideological subversion is an offensive psychological warfare tool that uses disinformation and deception as a weapon to manipulate a targeted population to think in ways that are against their own self-interest. It changes what people believe or changes their perception of reality in ways that serves their enemies. The purpose is to attack a people at the psychological level in a bid to destabilize and undermine their entire ideological structure. The ultimate goal is a complete collapse of the targeted population. That deployed ideological subversion system is the true reason why the African American culture changed from dignifyingly calling ourselves brothers and sisters and implementing the most successful unified protest in U.S. history to now undignifyingly calling ourselves niggers and bitches and being more divided than any previous time in U.S. history. This is not some feeble attempt at scapegoating that attempts to absolve ourselves of our own responsibilities by wrongly blaming white people, as so many have been brainwashed to respond. Nor is this some silly conspiracy theory. It's the absolute truth that they hide from us. It's always by deliberate design whenever the culture of the oppressed changes in ways that are beneficial to the oppressors. White oppressive forces determined in response to the 1960s unprecedented unified black protests that they must attack our greatest strengths and exploit our most exploitable weakness. They determined that our greatest strength was black unity. They therefore attack it unrelentingly with black divisive propaganda. It's the true reason why many black people now perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies. They determined that our most exploitable weakness was the fact that we've been stripped of our true identity and culture during slavery. They therefore exploited this fact to negatively steer our culture through negative media social engineering. It's the true reason why millions of us now self-identify ourselves as niggers, thugs, bitches, and hoes, sags our pants, and glorifies pimps. They negatively steer our culture while misleading us to believe that we're negatively steering ourselves. The black population doesn't know what's happening, and it doesn't even know that it doesn't know. White oppressive forces are playing chess while black people are playing hopscotch. The black population's ignorance of these facts is the white oppressor's greatest power over us. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach. African proverb. Here are the details. During the 1960s, African Americans' unified protest against the U.S. system of white supremacy was unprecedented. African Americans confronted it on all fronts. It was confronted through civil disobedience tactics, militant means, nonviolent protests, and with black lawyers pleading for equality within America's highest Supreme Court. The brilliant organizations and mobilizations of mass bus boycott, marches, freedom riders, and sit-ins that were peacefully conducted through unified protests of civil disobedience tactics by African Americans was remarkable. This gave the world those media images of black people being violently attacked by whites and not violently responding in return. This tactic, once shown in the media, shifted moral judgment away from the white oppressive society and moved it towards the sides of African Americans. This gained global support for African Americans. For this reason, Dr. King was even awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. This embarrassed the US government and eventually led to the government abandoning many of its blatant racist systems used to maintain its white dominance. It also resulted in the enactment of many civil rights laws that improved the lives of all minority groups. Therefore, while all ethnic groups possesses the ability to bring about real changes within the United States, only African Americans have produced some changes. It's for this reason why every other minority group, in fact, actually owes a debt to African Americans, which most have been brainwashed not to realize it. African Americans' unified protest still remains unrivaled by any other group in U.S. history. However, African Americans had unknowingly proven themselves as being the greatest threat against the U.S. system of white supremacy. When asked what is the greatest single threat to the United States, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover replied, the unification of the American Negro. You see, although the U.S. portrays itself publicly as being a democracy wherein which all citizens are equal, in reality, it has always been secretly committed to the preservation of its nation's white dominance. This unrelenting commitment necessitated that something had to be done to subdue and stifle African Americans' growing momentum in our demand for equality. If the white government did not do something to impede black advancement, it would then be diametrically opposing its own self-interest of preserving its nation's white dominance. Therefore, to remedy what was then called the Negro problem, in 1967, President Lyndon Johnson put together a committee called the Kerner Commission. Their assignment was to study the Negro problem, find the cause of the problem, and then develop solutions to remedy it. In 1968, white social scientists hired by the Kerner Commission determined that an aggravating core factor for that decade's unprecedented unified black protests was caused by an elevated and unifying black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement. They also learned then by studying the African American population that while oppressors, through their weapon advantages of guns and cannons, can brutally invade and enslave a people, they, however, cannot win their loyalty or sustain peace with those people indefinitely unless their minds have been manipulated to think in ways that prevent them from seeking retribution against their oppressors. Because whenever people are oppressed for long durations, their collective aggressions toward their oppressors will continue to grow until it reaches a boiling point, which resulting in massive acts of rebellion against their oppressors. The oppressed always eventually rebels against their oppressors. This is an inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are being oppressed for long durations. This is what was actually happening among the African American population during the 1960s. White racism had reached a boiling point within the collective minds of the African American population, which resulted in that decade's unprecedented unified black protests. Those white social scientists largely determined that they could subdue unified black protests by deploying an ideological subversion system that keeps the collective self-esteem of black African Americans really low, and it keeps our collective aggression shifted from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. They achieved both of these objectives by keeping black people believing the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of black people that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is so much more than just biased media reporting. It is actually an insidious black racially demoralizing divide and conquer psychological warfare campaign, also known as divide and rule. Demoralizing divide and conquer is a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between them. It's a well-documented and well-proven social science tactic used for controlling large targeted populations. This psychological warfare system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects Black people to receiving only the fraudulent and worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent Black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of Black population without being challenged or counterbalanced by an equal amount of Black positive racially affirming information. It conveys a subliminal message that Black people are now our own worst enemies and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that Black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when Black people are repeatedly presented these subliminal programmings from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects the Black population in terms of our behavior. The basis of this concept of warfare works by affecting the subconscious minds of Black people through unrelenting demoralization. It works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind. With time being unable to refute the constant negative information being told about us, many Black people eventually comes to accept it. Many Black people internalizes it. The repeated negative Black racially demoralizing propaganda unconsciously influence how many Black people perceives ourselves, creating the division and self-hatred among us. It also shifts Black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirected towards our own people. This is what's being done to us. The ultimate goal is to demoralize Black people to such an extent that we begin to doubt our ability to govern ourselves and believe that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that we're better off living under white dominance, and therefore we abandon all hopes of ever liberating ourselves. It also creates Black self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of bonds as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an implied objective. It doesn't matter if the information is untrue. Most Black people will act accordingly upon it because they've all been given the same disinformation about ourselves. If you doubt this disclosure, it's because you're not critically thinking. Because when critically thinking, it becomes easy to see just how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is that virtually all information that we receive about ourselves from the white society are consistently negative and Black racially demoralizing. It's a Black racially demoralizing, divided rule, psychological warfare propaganda campaign. Millions of our people are thinking without actually thinking and are therefore mentally enslaved by the white society. Those Black people that do not critically think never notices their mental change. Again, this is not some feeble-minded conspiracy theory. It's the truth that they don't want you to know. Not all wars are fought on the battlefield. Most are fought in the mind. Through the skillful, sustained use of repetitive media propaganda campaigns, white oppressive forces have literally created a psychological prison for the minds of Black people. This psychological warfare system provides the white society with a more proficient method for controlling Black people. For unlike the past blatant racist system that Black people could easily identify and therefore develop counter strategies against, this system is not easily recognized nor easily comprehended by its Black victims. White racism always works best when the Black victims no longer recognize how it works. This psychological warfare program works so well, in fact, that it not only makes Black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in fact causes us in many cases to prefer it. This psychological warfare propaganda campaign is at the root of the profound division and self-loathing now afflicting the Black community. We think negatively of ourselves, but who controls what we think about ourselves? Open your eyes. Black people, please critically think. Given that our perception of ourselves is being controlled by our enemies, we must always question that perception, especially given that these enemies have proven themselves as being the most notoriously deceitful, racist evildoers throughout history. Moreover, the oppressor's depiction of the oppressed is never a true one. It's always negatively distorted to serve the nefarious agendas of the oppressor. This fact has remained consistent throughout world history, and it is still true now in regard to Black people living under white oppression. Open your eyes and see your reality. Sadly, to our detriment, the oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. Some Black people are so brainwashed and so demoralized, they find it easier to continue believing the fraudulent worst about themselves than to accept that they're being lied to. The white media has always represented the white society, the tyranny of the white society's power over Black people. The Black population, the African American culture is also being negatively socially engineered by white oppressive forces. The narrative that we African Americans made the N-word ours and that using it now empowers us are totally untrue. Those false narratives are believed and repeated by those that are ignorant, naive, and gullible. These types are usually the easiest victim of the white oppressor's fraudulent propaganda campaigns. It was actually white oppressive forces that socialized us to self-identify ourselves as niggers through the hidden science known as negative media social engineering. Those who writes a people's narratives and controls their media images literally controls their culture. Because the white society writes all of our narratives and controls all Black mainstream media images, they're able to negatively steer our culture while misleading us to believe that we are negatively steering ourselves. Their ability to steer Black culture through their monopoly over our narratives and media images is immensely powerful. So much, in fact, that we're their puppets. Because they control our narratives and media images, it's actually them that are telling us how our group is supposed to think, act, and dress. This allows them to have many of us dressing like clowns and acting like buffoons. Our Black youth imitates and then adopts the white society's distorted depiction of us, thus making them their depiction of us true. It's what's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is when an original falsehood becomes true because it's been accepted as true. People's behaviors aligns with the falsehood, thus making it true. Such as witness when although Black people had been reporting crimes to the police since the abolishment of slavery, white propagandists created the false narrative that most Black people have a no-snitching policy and therefore don't report crimes. Many Black people accepted the false narrative as being true and then stopped reporting crimes, thus making the lives within the Black communities even more harsher. Here's another example of a self-fulfilling prophecy is when white propagandists created the narrative that we made the N-word ours and that using it ridiculously empowers us. Millions of African Americans accepted the narrative and we started calling ourselves niggers. And we insist that we made it our own word, totally ignorant that we did not. The white society's control over our narratives and media images allows them to negatively steer our culture while misleading us to believe that we are negatively steering ourselves. You know, most people naively believe that the media reflects our reality, but in truth, it is more often we that imitate what we see and learn from the media. A group's identity is shaped by how they repeatedly see themselves depicted within the mainstream media. People often become those derogatory media depictions of themselves that they've accepted as being their true reality. It's a true social science known as media social engineering. Whoever controls the people's media images controls their culture. Because the white society controls our media images, this allows them to negatively control our culture. And that's what's been happening to us. And we're completely ignorant of it. When these white social scientists create trends and customs for our black youths to imitate, they deliberately create those that gets our black youths acting and dressing as caricatures that reinforces resentment and anti-black prejudicial perceptions. Moreover, those images that reinforces many negative and racist stereotypes about black people. Black youths become the caricatures of the derogatory images and stereotypes that they've accepted. Case and point. Black sagging is a result of negative media social engineering. Some African Americans insist that sagging started with slavery. This is untrue. If it had not become prevalent throughout the culture until the 1990s. If it followed slavery, we'd have seen it within the years following slavery. But we didn't see it until the 1990s. Furthermore, if slaves were sagging, this would have severely reduced their ability to work as slaves, because a slave couldn't pick much cotton while holding up his pants. The white enslaved also would never allow a slave to sag, because this creates a possibility of his wife and daughters seeing the slave's private parts. So when you critically think and observe all the facts as they truly were, it becomes clear that sagging did not begin with slavery. It has nothing to do with the buck breaking. The sagging phenomenon is also not the result of the prison industry, where most prisons have a heavily enforced dress code requiring prisoners to wear Velcro fastening belts. Furthermore, if men engage in homosexual behaviors while incarcerated, most do not return to their communities and their families, flaunting that fact. Most will conceal any customs or behavior associated with being turned out in prison. When you're ignorant, nonsense makes perfect sense, okay? Furthermore, that prison to the street theory is not how national trends are created. For something to become a national trend requires concerted effort and media marketing. The style of sagging became a national phenomenon because of media social engineering of the African American culture. The sagging style was placed in movies and music videos, being depicted as cool and trendy. And then millions of black youths merely imitated the style. And now this is not some attempt at scapegoating, the attempt to absolve ourselves of our own responsibility by wrongly blaming white people. This is the absolute truth. This is also not some feeble-minded conspiracy theory. This is the knowledge that they hide from you. Media social engineering is a real and well-crafted system that allows the ruling class to control the masses and targeted populations. The white ruling class uses it to negatively steer the black culture. They're waging a covert war against us that most don't understand. Because we African Americans was totally stripped of our true identity and culture during the enslavement of our ancestors, we are therefore more susceptible to negative media social engineering. The nigger programming. The true reason why millions of African Americans now self-identify themselves as niggers is actually a true testament of the immense power of white negative media social engineering. Although the nigger programming is now being routinely reinforced through the white-controlled hip-hop industry, the programming initially started through black exploitation films during the 1960s. Because you see, they did this because words have power. They put a spell upon our subconscious minds. To subjugate and control a targeted population, the first step is to neutralize their alpha males, aka those possessing the warrior spirit. These are those alpha males that are psychologically wired to protect their women and their communities. White social scientists neutralize black alpha males by socially engineering millions to self-identify themselves as niggers. They did this to us because words, when repeated often enough, have immense power over the subconscious minds. Repeated words shapes our thoughts. And a thought held long enough by words repeated often enough becomes a belief. A belief then becomes your biology. We psychologically become the words that we repeatedly call ourselves. It's why men that call themselves thugs are more likely to engage in a fight than to avoid one. It's also why women that proclaim themselves as being bitches often become stubbornly unreasonable. It's also the reason why 90% of men who are sagging are also the same ones that are self-identifying themselves as niggers. They sag because they think they're niggers, and sagging is how niggers are supposed to dress. We subconsciously function based upon the words we repeatedly call ourselves. It's a psychological phenomenon that white social scientists have thoroughly researched. When we repeatedly call ourselves niggers, this conditions us to perceive ourselves through a false inherent subordinate identity that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over us. When we call ourselves niggers, this also separates us from our unifying African heritage. Without having a base identity to connect us with each other, over time we become further fragmented, and we become weaker as a people, and we can then be made into anything the white oppressors wants us to be. This is our hidden reality. Self-identify ourselves as niggers also psychologically divides us from Native Africans. When Africans are divided globally, we lose our global numerical advantage and lose all hopes of defeating global white supremacy. When we call each other niggers, we also dehumanize each other. This makes it easier to mistreat each other and even kill each other. This is a fact that the military has known for many centuries. This is the hidden reality, and that they keep us ignorant from knowing. Now, to keep us under the spells, they bring about these, they introduce new words. New stop. Okay, they say, okay, we're niggers. It's spelled with an A on the end, or niggers because there's a king in Ethiopia. Now listen, in Africa, there are over 2,000 languages and dialects, and each one of them have at least 3 words or more that means king. You know, king, ruler, overseer, all means king. Now, this means when you start counting, you can find over 9,000 words in Africa that means king. Now, of those 9,000 words, the only one that's coming in our community is the one niggers, the one that just happened to sound like niggers. Come on, wake up. Stop being gullible, ignorant, naive. They program us to call us niggers because they condition us to see ourselves through an inferior lens. The word niggers, N-E-G-U-S, is being used because it sounds like the original word. You see, when we call ourselves niggers by any spelling, it is still niggers because the subconscious mind doesn't see the different spelling. Those other words with an A-S on the end or U-S on the end, they're being used to keep us functioning under the original spell cast by the first N word. Brothers and sisters, we got to wake up from our ignorance because the subconscious mind doesn't see the different spelling. The time of believing in dumb shit is over. Elevate to liberate. One love and peace.